Turin should have reported the gesture immediately. Protocol allowed no ambiguity on that point. Any unexplained synchronization during a first-rank diplomatic ceremony, especially one landing within seconds of an anomalous orbital reading, belonged in the security channel before the applause had time to settle. Instead, he remained beneath the crystal dome with his tablet dark in his hand while the ceremony continued in flawless ceremonial order, as if reality had not just shifted half a degree beneath the feet of everyone present. The failure unsettled him at once, not because he was careless, but because he was not. His career existed because he noticed the wrong things at the right time and refused to call them harmless just because they were small. Humanity's welcome concluded without disruption. Provisional corridor access. Cultural exchange standing. A speaking seat in the Outer Coalition Council pending final defense review in 3 cycles. Generous terms by any measure, almost suspiciously generous, and the human delegation received them with graceful gratitude. Ambassador Ilara Thorne spoke exactly as a rising civilization should have spoken, calm, measured, wise enough to flatter the chamber without sounding eager for approval. The hall rewarded her with approving tones, lowered guards, and the subtle shift in posture that meant acceptance had begun to harden into trust. That should have settled him. Instead, it sharpened the unease. He had expected relief from a species whose future had just been opened by older powers. Relief always revealed itself. Shoulders softened. Breath deepened. Tension leaked from the hands. The humans showed something else. Satisfaction, yes, but not release. Not one of them looked like a delegate whose fate had been decided by others. They looked like people watching an expected outcome arrive on schedule. At the observatory reception, where the sanctuary glass opened over the storm-veined dead world below, Turin found himself drawn toward one of the human secondary delegates, Jonah Mercer, a cultural liaison with an easy smile and the dangerous gift of seeming harmless while controlling the rhythm of every conversation around him. Mercer turned archivists into admirers, skeptics into listeners, and formal exchanges into warm little performances that lowered everyone's caution by degrees so small they felt natural. Turin watched him do it and disliked how much he admired the precision. When the others drifted away, Turin asked about the power fluctuation during the ceremony. Mercer did not deny noticing it. He only smiled, glanced not at the stars ahead but at their reflection in the glass behind them, and said, with maddening softness, that the real trouble with analysts was that eventually they noticed other people noticing. Hours later, deep in the sanctuary archives, Turin found the maintenance note almost no one else would have seen: intermittent deep field mass echo, range impossible, signature unstable. He aligned it with the ceremony log and isolated the instant Ambassador Thorne had tapped 2 fingers against the stone. The timestamps matched within 3 seconds. He stared at the overlap until the sanctuary felt less like a diplomatic refuge and more like the inside of a sealed warning. The humans had not reacted to the anomaly. They had reacted to confirmation. And somewhere beyond Orith Prime, hidden between sensor sweeps, something vast enough to disturb the station's readings had already taken its place before the welcome ceremony was over. To BY first light cycle, Turin had reported the anomaly without reporting what truly unsettled him. He filed the mass echo, the timing overlap, the maintenance note, and the possibility of shield lensing distortion. He omitted Jonah Mercer's reflection check. He omitted the unnatural stillness in the human delegation when the pulse passed through the chamber. Most of all, he omitted his growing suspicion that humanity had entered the coalition hall already knowing something was out there. The formal version of the problem could be investigated. The deeper version still sounded too much like intuition, and intuition, however useful, was not yet admissible truth. Security answered with professional calm and procedural delay. The lower sensor spine was ordered recalibrated. Outer-range readings were flagged for quiet review. No alert was raised to the summit body. No motion restrictions were placed on the human delegation. It was all correct by protocol and wrong by instinct. Turin had spent enough years inside institutions to recognize the moment when caution became a sedative. If the readings were a glitch, delay cost nothing. If they were not, delay was exactly how serious things entered history wearing the mask of administrative order. The humans moved through the sanctuary as though none of it concerned them. That was what made them impossible to read cleanly. They were not evasive in the obvious ways. They did not huddle in secure knots or whisper in corners or begin sudden private consultations. Their schedule remained open, cooperative, almost generous. Ambassador Thorne attended the Cultural Archive tour with full attention and asked questions sharp enough to flatter the curators without exposing what she already knew. The human science envoy spent 2 hours in the botanical vaults discussing fungal resilience with the Vey scholars and left behind a request for shared samples. Mercer appeared everywhere at once, not rushed, not restless, only present in exactly the places where comfort mattered most. By midday he had played host, translator, and accidental entertainer for 3 different species clusters, dissolving suspicion not by argument, but by making everyone feel, briefly, that this new civilization might be understandable after all. Turin shadowed the edges of that movement and began to notice the second pattern. Whenever a sanctuary system paused, flickered, recalibrated, or requested a redundant handshake, one of the humans would register it instantly. Never dramatically. Never in a way that could be called a reaction by anyone not already looking for one. A fractional turn of the head. A sentence allowed to finish before a response came half a beat late. A shift in gaze toward reflective surfaces rather than direct sight lines. It happened at the transit arch, at the east gallery doors, at the lower elevator ring, and once during a culinary exchange when the ambient music skipped so softly no one else remarked on it. The humans noticed every time. That alone might still have been dismissed as discipline. Turin would have dismissed it himself if not for the records he had spent the night reading. Humanities archives were full of one idea wearing 10,000 different historical names. Redundancy. Civilian continuity. Hardened infrastructure. Contingency chains. Their species had not built peace by assuming interruption would never come. They had built it by teaching themselves to keep functioning when interruption did. By second cycle he had widened his search into cargo permissions, docking requests, and sealed summit logistics. He found nothing directly incriminating, only the kind of neatness that made experienced analysts distrust the entire page. Human cargo had been pre-cleared to a degree rare for a first-rank diplomatic visit. Their manifests were spare, clean, and plausible. Cultural gifts. Archival units. Environmental adapters. Medical reserves. Nothing military, nothing heavy, nothing that should have explained a deep field mass echo. Yet the total mass values had been rounded with unusual elegance, the kind that said the numbers were technically true while still concealing their shape. When he cross-checked arrival routes, one support shuttle had spent 11 minutes longer than recorded inside the outer service corridor, a gap small enough to vanish under traffic compression but large enough to matter if someone had wanted it to. He requested the service corridor footage. Access denied pending interior security authorization. That denial irritated him less than it should have. Irritation suggested surprise, and surprise suggested he still believed the sanctuary preferred clarity to stability. Orith Prime had survived for centuries by preventing panic before it formed language. The institution would rather investigate a possible threat quietly than risk insulting a new member civilization publicly. That logic was defensible. It was also how disasters learned to sit down and make themselves comfortable. Near evening watch he found Mercer alone in the lower resonance garden, a circular chamber where sound from the sanctuary's ventilation spines was shaped into soft harmonic patterns meant to calm species with heightened sensory stress. The human was seated beside a shallow black pool, sleeves rolled once at the forearms, reading from one of those physical books his delegation seemed to carry with almost performative affection. He looked up before Turin spoke, as though he had already measured the timing of his approach by the room's reflected light. "You are either very dedicated," Mercer said, closing the book around a finger to keep his place, "or having a very bad day." "I requested service corridor footage," Turin replied. And someone decided I do not need it." Mercer considered that with an expression hovering somewhere between sympathy and amusement. "That sounds less like a security decision and more like a political one. You say that as if you expected it." Mercer's smile did not fully appear this time. "Analyst Vale, there are only 3 things in the galaxy more predictable than fear. Bureaucracy under pressure. institutions protecting appearances, and people mistaking a delayed answer for the absence of one. Trinh stepped closer to the pool. You knew there would be an anomaly during the ceremony. Mercer looked back down at the closed book in his hand. That is a dangerous sentence. Is it false? It is incomplete. The answer landed harder than denial would have. Trinh held his silence and let it work. Around them the chamber's harmonic tones shifted by a fraction, adjusting to a species profile entering from the upper walkway and then fading again when the visitor chose another corridor. Mercer tracked the change unconsciously. Or perhaps not unconsciously. Trinh was beginning to hate how difficult the distinction had become. What are you protecting? He asked. Mercer's gaze returned to him at last, and for the first time the warmth receded enough for something colder to show through. Not hostility. Not fear. Calculation tempered by restraint. At this moment? Several possibilities. The summit. My delegation. Your institution's dignity. Maybe you. That is a theatrical answer. Human specialty, Mercer said, though there was no lightness in it now. But since you are here, let me give you something useful. If you are looking for danger, stop looking for the thing that appears on the sensors. Start looking for the thing that makes the sensors matter. Before Trinh could press, Mercer slid the book back into his coat and rose. The movement was easy, almost casual, yet it ended the exchange with the unmistakable finality of someone accustomed to deciding where conversation died. He inclined his head, not dismissively but with a strange, quiet respect, then left through the west corridor without once checking whether he was being followed. Trinh did follow, though not directly. He cut through the transport ring, used a maintenance stair, and reached the upper diplomatic quarter in time to see the human delegates entering one of the sanctuary's secure briefing salons. Only 3 of them: Ambassador Thorne, the defense attaché, and Mercer. No request had been logged for the room. The door sealed behind them under executive temporary authority. He did not have clearance to open it. He did, however, have access to the adjacent atmospheric control node. 20 minutes later, crouched beside humming service conduits while pretending to review air quality balances, he captured fragments of sound through the wall's resonance bleed. Not enough for transcript. Enough for meaning. Window shorter than forecast. If they see movement now, it changes the vote's aftereffect. No, keep the posture cooperative. Then Thorne's voice, calm as still water over depth. We proceed as planned. If the coalition notices on its own, we adapt. If they do not, we buy them the time anyway. Silence followed. Then another line, too faint at first, then sharpened by a shift in ventilation. Mercer stays visible. Vale is closer than the others. Do not push him unless we must. Trinh went very still. His first instinct was anger, but anger dissolved almost immediately under the heavier truth beneath it. They had identified him, measured him, and incorporated him into their calculations without ever appearing to do so. Not because he had failed to hide his interest. Because they had expected the right kind of person to notice. Mercer's openness, the notebook, the conversation, even the almost answer in the resonance garden, all of it rearranged itself in Trin's mind with terrifying elegance. The human attaché had not merely tolerated scrutiny. He had been shaping it, feeding it, keeping Trin close enough to question but not close enough to force the wrong response too early. He should have taken that straight to Security Command. He knew that. Instead he returned to the archives with the sick, focused clarity of a man who finally understood he was no longer observing a diplomatic irregularity. He was standing at the edge of a larger design. There, buried under transit authorizations and ceremonial supply updates, he found the detail that broke the last safe interpretation. An unscheduled correction had been inserted into the sanctuary's emergency evacuation lattice 3 hours before the welcome session. The edit was subtle, almost elegant, shifting civilian flow priorities away from the lower docking spines and toward interior refuge chambers in the event of external breach. No alarm attached. No explanatory note. Executive authorization routed through a humanitarian contingency waiver requested by the human delegation. They had not come to Orith Prime expecting a negotiation to become dangerous. They had come expecting the sanctuary itself to become a target. The revelation should have simplified Trin's choices. It did the opposite. If the human delegation had altered the sanctuary's emergency lattice before the welcome session, then they had entered Orith Prime carrying foreknowledge of a threat large enough to justify silent evacuation planning. That was deception by any institutional measure. It was also, in a colder reading, a form of protection. They had not triggered panic. They had not demanded special custody. They had not leveraged fear into concessions. They had simply prepared the station for an impact no one else believed was coming. The distinction lodged under Trin's ribs and refused to move. By morning watch, the lower docking spines were reporting intermittent guidance lag, 3 cargo lifts had stalled in different sectors without mechanical cause, and the sanctuary's public network was compensating for tiny packet losses that did not belong inside a structure this refined. Nothing dramatic. Nothing yet undeniable. But the pattern had changed. The station was no longer resting between formal events. It was tightening. Security Command finally granted him access to the service corridor footage, not because they trusted his instincts, but because too many small anomalies had started to accumulate across too many departments. Trin reviewed the feed in compressed layers. Human support crews moved with polite efficiency, unloading diplomatic cases, archival containers, medical kits, and environmental adapters exactly as declared. Then, 11 minutes into the corridor gap, something else happened. The cameras blanked for less than 2 seconds, a glitch so clean it was almost beautiful. When the image returned, one of the human cargo carts had changed weight distribution while appearing externally identical. Trin replayed the segment until the trick revealed itself. The difference was not the cart. It was Mercer. He entered the frame empty-handed and exited with the fractionally altered center of balance of a man wearing more than his formal coat should have allowed. Not a weapon exactly. Not a simple tool either. Something dense, concealed, and important enough to move personally. He took that to security and watched the room divide in predictable ways. The tactical officers focused on the corridor interference. The political stewards focused on the humanitarian waiver and the damage public exposure might do to the summit. The senior moderator asked the worst possible question in the calmest possible voice. Had the humans concealed danger from the sanctuary, or were they responding to danger the sanctuary had failed to detect? Nobody had enough proof to answer. That uncertainty became an excuse for partial action. Quiet teams were assigned to sweep lower systems. Human movement would be observed more closely. No delegation was to be confronted until the anomaly achieved a threshold of certainty the room could agree on. Thresholds were comforting things. They gave fear furniture to sit on. By second watch, thresholds ceased to matter. The first real failure hit the East Habitation Ring, where 3 atmospheric shutters sealed out of sequence and trapped nearly 200 junior staff, servers, and visiting aides between pressure compartments for 6 panicked minutes. The sanctuary corrected the error before fatalities began, but the effect spread faster than the facts. Rumor moved through polished halls and soft-lit galleries with more speed than official reassurance ever could. Doors had sealed. People had screamed. A Keeler child had fainted. An elderly delegate from the HFY compact had collapsed under stress and been revived only because a human medic from the visiting delegation happened to be nearby before sanctuary responders arrived. That detail irritated certain counselors and comforted others. Trin noticed only one thing. The human medic had reached the scene before the alarm displayed on his security slate. The sanctuary did not look frightened. Institutions almost never did. It looked busier. More escorts in the corridors. More quiet conversations cut short when analysts approached. More technicians moving with the brisk focus of people trying to keep systems stable while pretending stability had not already cracked. Trin spent the next hours moving between sectors, chasing the same sensation he had felt during the ceremony, the sense that 2 realities were coexisting in the same structure. One was public, procedural, graceful. The other was already tactical. The humans moved inside the second one as naturally as breathing. He found Mercer near the lower docking overlook, standing beside a panoramic shield pane while 2 sanctuary maintenance crews argued over a false telemetry cascade below. The human's posture was relaxed enough to irritate on sight. His eyes were not. They tracked every worker, every delay, every closed service hatch in the reflection. "You planted something in the corridor," Trin said without preamble. Mercer did not turn. "That depends on how legalistically you define planted. You manipulated the evacuation lattice. You concealed cargo. You knew this station was going to come under pressure." "Pressure is already here," Mercer replied. "The only question left is whether Orith Prime intends to survive it elegantly or honestly." Trin stepped beside him. Through the shield pane, sanctuary tugs drifted in geometric silence around the docking web, their navigation lights blinking with ceremonial precision. "Beautiful. Orderly. Vulnerable. You should have warned us." Mercer gave him a long look then, and the easy charm was gone entirely. What remained was older than humor and harder than diplomacy. "We did. That is not warning. That is staging." "That," Mercer said, "is the language civilizations use when they mistake an ignored warning for a hidden one." Before Trin could answer, the pane dimmed under an emergency polarization sweep. A station-wide advisory rolled through the public network announcing transient sensor interference caused by outer shield resonance. Routine. Temporary. No threat to guess. The lie was so polished it almost deserved admiration. Mercer listened to it in silence, then asked, very quietly, "How many more routine incidents before your people let themselves say the word attack?" The word should have sounded absurd inside a sanctuary that had hosted ceasefires, accession ceremonies, and interspecies memorials for nearly 400 years. It did not. Not anymore. The next blow landed from nowhere visible. A freight spindle detached from its moorings above Dock Spine 3 and sheared across a service bridge just as a group of support staff began crossing. The bridge folded. Bodies hit the lower maintenance mesh. Glass shattered 3 levels up. Emergency foam burst from wall seams. Trin was already running when the first scream reached the corridor. By the time he arrived, sanctuary responders were still seconds out and the scene had become raw chaos. Ruptured conduit lines, injured staff pinned under twisted support ribs, smoke rolling low, frightened delegates frozen by the speed of it all. In the center of the collapse, Ambassador Ilara Thorne was on her knees with her formal robes scorched black at one sleeve, helping the same human medic from the East Habitation ring cut a trapped clerk free with a thermal splice tool torn from a broken wall kit. So that was the deeper pattern. The humans were not only prepared for system failure, they were distributed for it. Trin dropped beside a pinned maintenance worker and began levering metal by hand until responders arrived with proper lift braces. Across the wreckage he saw Mercer appear from a service hatch that should have been sealed, a compact dark case in one hand, his face expressionless in the smoke. Their eyes met for the briefest instant. No surprise. No triumph. Only confirmation, as if both of them had crossed another invisible threshold and knew there would be no return to ordinary diplomacy after this. The station stabilized the bridge collapse before full decompression spread, but the damage to confidence was worse than the structural breach. Delegates began pressing for private transport. Sanctuary officials began slowing departures under the pretext of safety sequencing. External traffic control started reporting phantom echoes at the edge of approach space, too large to classify, too inconsistent to lock. Every explanation now competed with a darker one. Trin returned to command expecting panic and found something stranger: denial under pressure. Several counselors still argued that the anomalies might be sabotage by an internal faction rather than external positioning. A few suspected the humans themselves were manufacturing crisis to force accelerated coalition admission under emergency solidarity. The idea was politically useful because it preserved the institution's pride. Trin wanted to dismiss it outright. Then he remembered the cargo concealment, the lattice edit, the careful half-truths. Pride was not the only thing blurring the picture. He went back to the archives and pulled every restricted transport request filed by the human delegation since entering coalition space. That was where the major twist finally showed its full outline. The hidden cargo was not offensive hardware. It was an encrypted continuity vault, a dense portable archive designed to store redundant witness records, civilian identity backups, evacuation routes, emergency legal proofs, and chain of custody logs. Humanity had not smuggled in a first-strike device. They had smuggled in the infrastructure required to preserve truth after systems collapse. That was what Mercer had carried personally through the corridor gap. Not a weapon to start a war. A device built for the moment institutions failed and survivors needed reality to outlive the damage. The meaning of it hit all at once, rearranging every earlier assumption with brutal efficiency. Humanity had not come to Orith Prime expecting to flex hidden force. They had come expecting someone else to create confusion, deny responsibility, fracture the sanctuary's systems, and bury accountability in the wreckage. Their deception had not been designed to win advantage in negotiations. It had been designed to keep evidence alive if the sanctuary itself became the battlefield. Turin sat with that while the station lights dimmed into conservation mode one corridor at a time. Outside the archives, people were still using soft voices, still wearing diplomatic fabrics, still pretending the shape of order remained intact. Inside him, the story had changed. The question was no longer whether the humans had hidden something. They had. The question was why they had trusted no one here enough to tell the whole truth until events forced it into view. The answer arrived not through data, but through sound. A priority chime cut across the internal network, sharper than any advisory before it. Then another. Then the sanctuary's voice, stripped at last of ceremonial grace, informing all sectors that long-range traffic had entered exclusion range without recognized transponder identity. External shields were cycling to combat density. Non-essential personnel were to move toward interior refuge corridors immediately. Combat density. At the very edge of the alert, beneath the rising pulse in the walls and the sudden acceleration of feet in distant halls, Turin understood the final and most dangerous truth. The humans had not stayed quiet because they wanted leverage. They had stayed quiet because they knew warning the sanctuary too early would have triggered political paralysis, disbelief, and exactly the kind of exposed scramble now unfolding under real attack. And if they had been right about that, then they might also be right about something even worse. Whatever had just arrived outside Orith Prime was only the part of the threat meant to be seen. The sanctuary had never been built to look afraid. Even under attack, Orith Prime tried to preserve its manners. Corridor lights shifted from ceremonial gold to calm evacuation white. Bulkheads sealed with a measured grace that would have felt reassuring in any other crisis. The public voice remained smooth, precise, and offensively composed as it directed thousands of living beings toward interior refuge corridors while combat density rolled across the shields in trembling waves. But beneath that polished surface the truth was finally too large to hide. People were running now. Not many at first. A handful of aides. Then junior envoys. Then technicians carrying tool cases they had no reason to believe would matter in a kinetic breach, except that carrying something made terror feel less naked. The sanctuary's dignity held for perhaps 90 seconds. After that, survival began speaking its own language. Turin moved with the flow only long enough to see the shape of the panic. Then he cut against it. Every instinct born of training, protocol, and self-preservation should have pulled him toward command, toward data consolidation, toward the narrow professional safety of advising from behind secure glass. Instead he turned for the lower continuity sectors because he already knew where the real center of gravity had shifted. Not to the council chamber. Not to tactical command. To the humans and whatever they had prepared for the moment institutions stopped being able to protect themselves through procedure alone. He found Mercer at Junction 9 with the dark continuity vault open beside him on a service crate, its inner surfaces alive with branching identity grids, infrastructure maps, and sanctuary emergency layers the public network was no longer reliably rendering. The human was no longer pretending to be ornamental. Gone was the easy social rhythm, the soft humor, the harmless archivist's charm. He moved like a man who had been waiting for the room to stop lying about what it was. 2 sanctuary technicians, 1 VE system scholar, and the human medic from the earlier breaches worked beside him while evacuees streamed past in frightened clusters. Turin reached them just as the station lurched under a glancing impact that never fully arrived as sound. The floor shifted, the lights whitened further, and somewhere above them something vast dragged across the shield envelope with a resonance that made every bone in his body understand size before his mind could name it. Mercer glanced up. "Good," he said, not warmly but with unmistakable relief. "You finally look like a man willing to be useful." Trin would have resented that under any lesser circumstances. "Tell me what we're facing." Mercer keyed 3 overlays into existence over the vault. Outer approach vectors. Internal system fractures. Refuge density maps. Visible threat is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Pushes the sanctuary outward. Forces attention to the shield line. Makes everyone think this is a siege. It isn't. The siege is cover. For what? Mercer magnified the lower infrastructure lattice. Maintenance spines. Cargo intakes. Waste extraction shafts. Old architecture the sanctuary's ceremonial systems had grown over but never fully erased. For the internal kill, he said. Compartment failure. Traffic redirection. Isolated decompressions. Data loss. Enough confusion to turn a sanctuary into a graveyard of unprovable causes. The medic looked up from a casualty slate she was updating by hand after the network dropped half a refuge roster. And if the identity backups go, a lot of the dead won't even stay officially dead. They'll just become missing. There it was again, the thing that made humanity so hard to understand until the pressure came on. They did not begin with the enemy. They began with what collapse would do to ordinary people afterward. Trin felt a chill that had nothing to do with climate control. You knew this pattern. Mercer's eyes returned to the vault. We knew the architecture of it. Not the venue. Not the exact sponsor. But this kind of operation isn't new. Hit systems. Fracture trust. Kill records. Then let politics bury motive under procedural ambiguity. That answer carried more history than there was time to unpack. Trin let it stand. What do you need? Mercer gave him his first fully direct look since the ceremony, and in it Trin saw the moment something subtle but real shifted between them. Not friendship. Not yet. Recognition. We need the sanctuary's truth spine, he said. Original command route. The layer beneath public traffic management and above tactical override. If we can lock the continuity vault into that spine, then every death, every route edit, every shield manipulation, every sealed hatch order becomes impossible to erase cleanly. And if you can't? Mercer did not soften the answer. Then whoever survives gets to argue with lies for the next 100 years. They split because there was no other choice. The medic and technicians began moving evacuees by old service routes the sanctuary's official guidance had already started misrouting. Mercer went upward toward the truth spine access junction buried behind executive chambers and ceremonial control alcoves. Trin went with him because, somewhere between the archive logs and the bridge collapse and the word combat spoken aloud at last, the old boundaries of his role had fallen away. He was no longer observing a dangerous situation. He was inside a decision that would define what the situation meant when history later tried to describe it. They climbed through service arteries the sanctuary preferred its guests never see, unfinished ribs beneath polished halls, conduit chambers where the air smelled of ozone and hot metal, maintenance ladders vibrating with distant impacts as the external threat continued worrying at the shield envelope. Above them, the sanctuary still looked like a monument to cooperation. Inside it, stripped of ceremony, it resembled what every civilization became when tested hard enough: structure, heat, fear, and choices. At the first sealed junction they found sanctuary security waiting. Not a kill team. Worse. Uncertain professionals with drawn pulse carbines and contradictory orders. Their commander, a veteran Trin recognized from Summit Perimeter Review, took one look at him beside Mercer and understood enough to become dangerous. Step away from the human, she ordered. Executive Command has restricted all foreign access to root systems pending review. Pending whose review? Trin shot back. The same command layer that let an emergency lattice rewrite stand unchallenged? Her jaw tightened. That was answer enough. She had not been briefed fully. She was being used to preserve chain of command while chain of command was already compromised by caution, politics, or something more poisonous? Mercer, infuriatingly, chose that moment to remain silent. Turin realized why almost immediately. A human argument here would turn the standoff into species friction. It had to be his institution refusing itself. He stepped forward just enough for the security line to refocus on him. "You can arrest me when the sanctuary still exists in a form worth arresting me in," he said. "Until then, every second you hold this corridor serves whoever wants our failures to look accidental." The commander's gaze flicked from him to the subtle wrongness in the system lights, to the static jumping at the edge of her slate display, to Mercer's open vault access node with its hard, undeniable maps of refuge densities and failing sectors. Fear changed shape inside her. Not smaller. Cleaner. She lowered her weapon by a fraction. Her team followed. 5 minutes, she said. "If I've just helped you compromise the sanctuary, I'll be the one who puts you both down." Mercer inclined his head as if she'd handed him a beverage. "That feels fair." They reached the truth spine just as the sanctuary took its worst hit yet, not an explosive impact but a coordinated systems convulsion. Gravity hiccuped. Lights failed. Emergency red strobed and died. Somewhere far below, a chain of pressure doors sealed in the wrong order and hundreds of people began pounding on metal. The entire station seemed to inhale on a broken breath. Turin grabbed a rail. Mercer drove the continuity vault's anchor spikes into the spine housing by pure practiced reflex, and then the room plunged into a darkness so complete it felt ancient. In that dark, the sanctuary stopped being an institution and became a fact. People would live or die here based on what reached the record before the record was taken from them. Backup power returned in strips. Mercer's face reappeared in fragments of cold light as he forced the vault into handshake with the spine. Sanctuary Command tried to reject the merge. Executive override. Civilian architecture mismatch. Foreign system contamination. Mercer bypassed one refusal, then another, his hands moving with the kind of speed that belonged to long rehearsal rather than improvisation. Turin fed him authorization branches from Analyst access routes no one else in the chamber would have thought to chain together under stress. For the first time since the ceremony, they were no longer circling each other. They were working in the same language. Then the real counterstroke came. Not from outside. From command. The spine flashed with a sealed directive carrying executive emergency legitimacy: isolate lower casualties, preserve council ring integrity, and partition refugee sectors pending shield stabilization. It was bureaucratic phrasing laid over slaughter. Seal the vulnerable parts. Save the visible parts. If the station had to survive unevenly, let it survive in the shape power preferred to remember. Turin read the order once and understood why humanity had trusted no one here enough to speak plainly before the attack began. Under sufficient pressure, institutions did not always reveal courage. Sometimes they revealed hierarchy. Mercer saw it too. "There," he said quietly, almost without anger. "That's the second blade." Turin made the decision before the thought had fully formed. He burned his credentials into the spine and voided the partition route through Analyst Emergency Challenge, a self-destructive move that would almost certainly end his career if there were a career left to end. The Sanctuary accepted the contest for 4.2 seconds, just long enough for Mercer to force the continuity vault through final handshake and broadcast the full chain. The silent emergency lattice edits, the internal compartment manipulations, the command hesitations, the attempted civilian partition. Every logged anomaly tied together into a narrative no post-crisis committee could later break apart into convenient misunderstandings. The system locked. Every refuge node across Orith Prime lit with corrected routes. Every casualty record mirrored outward. Every command directive copied to external buffers beyond immediate local deletion. The sanctuary could still burn. People could still die. But the truth would not die quietly with them. As if enraged by exposure, the attack shifted. The visible threat outside intensified, hammering the shields not to breach immediately but to overload the station's capacity to manage all crises at once. Somewhere beneath them, a refuge corridor vented. Somewhere above, a council annex lost pressure. The security commander who had let them through came over the comms snarling coordinates and casualty counts while her team dragged trapped aides through smoke. The human medic's voice cut in moments later, exhausted but steady, reporting that civilians were rerouting correctly now and lower sectors were beginning to stabilize. For the first time since the attack began, the sanctuary was not merely reacting. It was choosing. The final work was ugly, physical, and without ceremony. Turin and Mercer descended into the sector's command had nearly sacrificed and helped force doors, carry injured, restore local guidance nodes, and hold panicked traffic together one intersection at a time. The humans had not placed themselves at the center of heroism. They had placed themselves in the places collapse hit first. Ambassador Thorne appeared in smoke and flashing white dust with half her formal dignity burned away, directing mixed teams through a shattered transit ring as though she had always expected diplomacy to end on her feet in debris. The medic kept moving despite a blood-soaked sleeve and a voice going raw from repetition. Sanctuary technicians who had spent entire careers polishing systems for peace tore open their own architecture to keep strangers alive inside it. Delegates stopped being categories and became hands under weight, shoulders against metal, bodies choosing not to run when others still needed passage. That was when Turin finally understood the deepest thing about humanity and why lesser powers would keep misreading it until the lesson cost them dearly. Human strength was not clean. It was not graceful in the way older species admired themselves for being graceful. It did not wait for ideal conditions, moral clarity, or institutional permission. It entered disaster carrying memory, contingency, defiance, and an almost irrational insistence that people mattered before systems did. Their warmth was not innocence. It was infrastructure. Their friendliness was not softness. It was a way of building enough trust, fast enough, that when the fracture came, others would move together instead of alone. By the time external Allied patrols arrived, late, shocked, and now unable to ignore what the broadcast had made undeniable, the attack had already failed in the only way that finally mattered. Orith Prime was wounded. Portions of the lower spines were gone. Hundreds were injured. Too many had died. But the station had not become an elegant ruin full of disputed facts. It had become a witness. In the aftermath, when emergency light gave way to the pale exhausted colors of survival and the sanctuary smelled of burned insulation, antiseptic, and opened walls, Turin stood with Mercer beneath a cracked observation pane overlooking the dead world below. The storm veins still moved across the darkness as if nothing significant had happened above them. For a long moment neither spoke. At the ceremony, Turin said at last, "You were already counting how many ways this could go wrong." Mercer's mouth curved, but only slightly. "No," he said. "Ilara was counting. I was distracting people." That answer, absurd and honest at once, drew the first real laugh Turin had managed since the attack began. It hurt more than some of his bruises. "You manipulated me." "Yes. You could have trusted me earlier." Mercer looked out at the storm-veined dark. "Could have? Maybe. But we've met a lot of institutions that liked the shape of the warning less than the comfort of doubting it. You weren't the problem, Turin. Timing was. There was too much truth in that to resist." Below them, repair craft were already moving around the sanctuary's wounded flanks. Behind them, the station had begun the long work every survivor knew by instinct. Count the living, name the dead, preserve what happened, rebuild only after memory had been secured. Humanity had not saved Orith Prime alone. But without them, the sanctuary would have died wearing the wrong story. And somewhere beyond the first visible attackers, beyond the political brokers and quiet sponsors who had counted on panic, deletion, and blame to finish what force began, larger hands had just learned the worst possible lesson. Earth had not entered the coalition as a naive new member grateful for protection. It had entered as a species that smiled warmly, prepared quietly, and became hardest to defeat precisely when everyone else still mistook kindness for the absence of teeth.